The birthday cake sat in the center of the dining room table like a porcelain centerpiece, 3 tiers of buttercream perfection decorated with delicate sugar flowers that must have cost a fortune. My daughter Victoria had outdone herself this year, celebrating her 35th birthday with an elegance that matched her carefully curated life. Crystal champagne flutes caught the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows of her Beacon Hill townhouse, and the air smelled of expensive candles and catered hors d'oeuvres. I was adjusting the collar of my silk blouse when I felt small fingers grip my wrist with surprising urgency. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My 7-year-old granddaughter Lily pressed herself against my side, her face tilted up toward mine with an expression I had never seen before. Her blue eyes were wide and glassy, like she had been crying or was about to start. "Grandma Diane," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chatter of guests in the next room. "Please don't eat the cake. Promise me you won't eat any of it." I looked down at her, confused by the intensity in her small voice. Lily was usually a bubbly child, the kind who danced through rooms and laughed at her own jokes. But right now she looked terrified. "Sweetheart, what are you talking about? It's your mommy's birthday cake." She shook her head violently, her dark curls bouncing. "I heard them talking. Grandma, please. Something bad is in it. You have to believe me." Before I could respond, Victoria's voice rang out from the living room, bright and hostess perfect. "Mother, are you hiding in there? Come join us. Marcus is about to make a toast." Lily's grip tightened on my wrist for just a moment, then she let go and disappeared down the hallway toward her bedroom. I stood there in the dining room, staring at that beautiful cake and feeling a cold unease settle in my stomach. Children said strange things sometimes. They had vivid imaginations. But there had been something in Lily's eyes that looked less like imagination and more like genuine fear. "My name is Diane Holloway and I am 62 years old. I thought I had raised my daughter to be honest, successful, and kind. I thought I knew everything about her life, about her marriage to Marcus Chen, about the beautiful home they had built together in one of Boston's most prestigious neighborhoods. I thought I understood my family. But in the next 4 hours, my granddaughter's whispered warning would unravel everything I believed to be true, and I would discover that the people we love most are sometimes the ones hiding the darkest secrets." I walked into the living room where 20 guests were mingling, holding their champagne flutes and making polite conversation about real estate prices and vacation homes on the Cape. Victoria stood near the fireplace in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo. She had always been beautiful, my daughter, but somewhere along the way that beauty had become almost intimidating in its perfection. Every hair in place, every outfit coordinated, every smile measured and controlled. Marcus stood beside her with his arm around her waist, looking every bit the successful tech entrepreneur in his tailored navy suit. He had founded some kind of software company that I never fully understood, something about data analytics and cloud computing. All I knew was that it had made them wealthy enough to afford this 4-story townhouse and a lifestyle that seemed pulled from a magazine spread. He caught my eye and smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had made me like him immediately when Victoria first brought him home 8 years ago. "There she is," Marcus said, gesturing toward me with his champagne flute. "The woman who raised this incredible person we're celebrating today. Diane, come join us." I moved through the crowd, accepting hugs from Victoria's friends who I barely knew, nodding at Marcus's business partners whose names I could never remember. The whole scene felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. Lily's words kept echoing in my head. "Something bad is in it. Are you all right, Mother?" Victoria asked quietly, leaning close so only I could hear. "You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just a little warm in here with all these people." She studied my face for a moment with those sharp green eyes that missed nothing, then nodded and turned back to her guests. "Everyone, if I could have your attention, please. My wonderful husband would like to say a few words." Marcus raised his glass and launched into a toast that was both funny and touching, talking about how Victoria had changed his life, how lucky he felt to have found her, how excited they were about the future they were building together. Everyone laughed at the right moments and made appreciative sounds when he talked about their love story. It was all very rehearsed and perfect, just like everything else in their lives. but I kept glancing toward the hallway where Lily had disappeared. Should I go check on her? Should I tell Victoria what she had said? It seemed absurd to interrupt this elegant party with concerns about a 7-year-old's cryptic warning. Yet something in my gut was screaming that I should not ignore this. The toast ended and everyone applauded. Victoria kissed Marcus on the cheek and then clapped her hands together. All right, everyone. Let's move to the dining room. I'm dying to cut into this masterpiece that Marcus surprised me with from that bakery in the North End. The crowd began migrating toward the dining room, drawn by the promise of cake and more. Champagne. I hung back watching them go, feeling that cold unease spreading through my chest. Diane, aren't you coming? It was Claire Pemberton, Victoria's college roommate and one of her oldest friends. She had a kind face and had always been friendly to me at these gatherings. I need to check on Lily first, I said. She seemed upset earlier. Claire's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been concern or might have been recognition. Is she okay? I'm not sure. Did you notice anything odd about her today? Claire hesitated, glancing toward the dining room where guests were gathering around the cake. She's been quiet, more withdrawn than usual. I asked her if she wanted to help pass out the party favors earlier, and she just shook her head and went to her room. This was not like Lily at all. She loved being the center of attention at family gatherings, loved helping with party preparations. I'm going to go talk to her, I said. I found Lily sitting on her bed, holding a stuffed elephant that she had owned since she was a baby. Tears were streaming down her face, and when she saw me she jumped up and ran into my arms. Grandma, did you eat it? Please tell me you didn't eat any. I knelt down so we were eye level, holding her small shoulders gently. No, sweetheart, I haven't eaten anything yet. But you need to tell me what's wrong. What did you hear? Who were you talking about? She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Last night I couldn't sleep. I came downstairs to get water and I heard Daddy and Aunt Rebecca talking in his office. The door was open a little bit. Aunt Rebecca was Marcus's younger sister, a pharmacist who lived in Cambridge. She came to family dinners occasionally, but I didn't know her well. What were they saying? Lily's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Daddy said something about the cake having medicine in it. Special medicine that would make Mommy sleep. And Aunt Rebecca said to be careful with the dose because too much could be really dangerous. Then Daddy said it was the only way to keep Mommy calm during the signing. My blood turned to ice. The signing? What signing? I don't know. But Grandma, they said the medicine was in the cake. All of it. And they were laughing about how nobody would know because the frosting would hide the taste. I stared at my granddaughter trying to process what she was telling me. Marcus was planning to drug Victoria? And his sister, the pharmacist, was helping him? It sounded insane, like something from a television thriller. But the fear in Lily's eyes was real, and children this age didn't usually make up stories this specific and detailed. Did they see you? Lily shook her head. I hid behind the stairs. After they stopped talking, I ran back to my room really quiet. I pulled her close, my mind racing. You did the right thing telling me, sweetheart. You're very brave. From downstairs, I could hear Victoria's voice calling out. Mother. Lily. Come down, we're about to cut the cake. I looked at Lily's terrified face and made a decision. Stay here, baby. Lock your door and don't come out until I come get you. Can you do that for me? She nodded, clutching her elephant. I kissed her forehead and hurried back downstairs, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. In the dining room, all 20 guests had gathered around the table. Victoria stood at the head with a silver cake knife in her hand, smiling radiantly. Marcus stood beside her with a camera, ready to capture the moment. There you are, Mother, Victoria said when she saw me. I was beginning to think you'd abandoned my party. I moved closer to the table, studying the cake more carefully now. It looked completely normal, professionally made, beautiful. But if what Lily said was true, somewhere in those 3 perfect tears was something that could hurt my daughter. Actually, Victoria, before you cut the cake, could I speak with you privately for just a moment? Her smile faltered slightly. Right now? Everyone's waiting. Marcus's expression shifted, something sharp entering his eyes. Is everything okay, Diane? I forced myself to meet his gaze steadily. I just need a quick word with my daughter. It won't take long. Victoria set down the knife with a small sigh of frustration. Fine. Everyone please help yourselves to more champagne. We'll be right back. She followed me into the kitchen, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The moment we were alone, her perfectly composed expression cracked slightly. Mother, what is this about? You're being incredibly rude to my guests. I closed the kitchen door and lowered my voice. Lily told me something disturbing. She overheard Marcus and his sister talking last night about putting something in your cake. Some kind of medicine. Victoria stared at me for a long moment, then let out a sharp laugh. Are you serious right now? You're disrupting my birthday party because of something my 7-year-old daughter thinks she heard. Her tone was dismissive, but I saw her hand tremble slightly as she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. She was very specific, Victoria. She said they talked about dosage and keeping you calm for some kind of signing. What signing?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
My daughter's face went pale, then flushed with what looked like anger. I have no idea what you're talking about. And frankly, I'm insulted that you would believe a child's imagination over my husband. But something in her eyes told a different story. There was fear there, buried under the indignation. Then you won't mind if we have the cake tested before anyone eats it. That's ridiculous. You're being paranoid and insulting. Victoria moved toward the door, but I stepped in front of it. If I'm wrong, then we'll all have a good laugh about it. But if I'm right, then your husband is trying to drug you and I need to know why. We stood there in tense silence for several seconds. In the dining room beyond, I could hear guests laughing, glasses clinking, life continuing as normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. Victoria's shoulders sagged slightly and she looked away from me. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more vulnerable. There's a board meeting Monday morning. Marcus wants me to sign over my shares in his company to a trust he controls. I felt my stomach drop. Your shares? The ones your father left you. Victoria's late father, my ex-husband Robert, had been an early investor in Marcus's tech startup before he died 3 years ago from a heart attack. He had left Victoria a significant stake in the company, shares that were now worth millions. Marcus says it's for tax purposes, that having the shares in a trust will protect us legally if the company goes public next year. She still wasn't looking at me, her gaze fixed on the expensive tile floor. But you don't believe him. It wasn't a question. She shook her head slowly. I've asked to see the trust documents 3 times. He keeps saying they're with his lawyer, that he'll show me on Monday before the meeting. But every time I bring it up he gets angry. Says I don't trust him. Says I'm being paranoid. My hands clenched into fists. And now he's planning to drug you so you'll be compliant enough to sign without asking more questions. Victoria finally looked at me, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes. I've been so stupid. There have been signs for months. The way he's been pushing me to give him power of attorney. The way he's been isolating me from my friends, always finding reasons why I can't attend certain events or see certain people. I told myself I was imagining things. You're not stupid. You're being manipulated by someone you trusted. I pulled her into a hug and felt her body shake with silent sobs. What do we do? In the next room, Marcus's voice called out cheerfully. Everything okay in there? Cake's getting lonely out here. Victoria pulled away from me and wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. We need proof. If we accuse him without evidence, he'll just deny everything and make me look crazy. I thought for a moment. Call the police. Tell them you have reason to believe someone has tampered with food at your party. She looked uncertain. What if Lily misunderstood what she heard? What if I'm overreacting? Before I could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Marcus walked in with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sorry to interrupt the mother-daughter moment, but people are starting to wonder if we're ever going to eat this cake. His gaze moved between Victoria and me, and I could see him calculating, trying to determine what we had been discussing. The charm was still there in his expression, but underneath it was something colder, more calculating than I had ever noticed before. We were just coming, Victoria said, her voice steadier than I expected. I wanted to ask my mother about something for Lily's school project. Marcus studied her face for a beat too long. Everything all right? You look upset. This was it, I realized. This was the moment where we either confronted him or pretended nothing was wrong. If we went back out there and Victoria ate that cake, we might never get another chance to find out the truth. And if what Lily heard was accurate, who knew what Marcus was capable of? I stepped forward, placing myself slightly between Marcus and Victoria. Actually, Marcus, we do have a small problem. Lily isn't feeling well. I think we should postpone cutting the cake until we can take her to see a doctor. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Lily seemed fine an hour ago. The change in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. The friendly warmth had evaporated, replaced by something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Children can get sick very suddenly, I said evenly. Victoria, and I think it's best to be cautious. Marcus took a step closer, and I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something sharper, the scent of stress or anger poorly concealed. That seems like an overreaction. Why don't we let Victoria make decisions about her own daughter? He said it pleasantly enough, but there was a threat embedded in the words. Victoria moved to stand beside me, and I felt her hand slip into mine and squeeze. I agree with my mother. I want to take Lily to urgent care just to be safe. We can celebrate later. For several seconds, Marcus said nothing. He just looked at both of us with an expression that made my skin crawl. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket and he glanced at it, his jaw tightening. Fine, he said curtly. I'll tell the guests there's been a change of plans. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Victoria and I standing there in the heavy silence. My daughter's hand was still gripping mine tightly, and I could feel her trembling. I'm scared, Mom, she whispered. It was the first time in years that she had called me Mom instead of Mother, and the vulnerability in her voice broke my heart. We're going to figure this out, I promised. But first we need to get that cake secured as evidence and we need to get Lily somewhere safe. Victoria nodded and pulled out her phone with shaking hands. While she called 911, I moved to the kitchen doorway and peered into the dining room. Marcus was talking to his business partners in low tones, gesturing animatedly. Several guests looked confused, checking their phones and whispering to each other. The beautiful birthday cake still sat untouched in the center of the table, its sugar flowers gleaming under the chandelier light. I thought about all the times Marcus had been in this house, all the family dinners and holidays and ordinary moments. Had he been planning this for months? Had every smile, every kind gesture, every declaration of love for Victoria been part of an elaborate scheme to steal her inheritance? The police dispatcher told Victoria they were sending officers immediately and advised us not to eat or drink anything until they arrived. Victoria ended the call and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. What do I tell the guests? The truth, or close enough to it. Tell them Lily is sick and you need to end the party early. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked back into the dining room with her hostess smile firmly in place. I followed close behind, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. Everyone, I'm so sorry but we're going to have to cut the party short, Victoria announced. Lily isn't feeling well, and we need to take her to see a doctor right away. There were immediate sounds of concern and sympathy from the guests. Claire Pemberton moved toward Victoria with a worried expression. Is there anything I can do to help? Before Victoria could answer, Marcus interjected smoothly. That's very kind, Claire, but I think we have it under control. Just a precaution. These things happen with kids. His hand moved to Victoria's lower back in what probably looked like a supportive gesture to everyone else. But I saw my daughter stiffen at his touch. People began gathering their coats and purses, offering well wishes and promises to reschedule. As the guests filed out, I went upstairs to get Lily. She was still in her room, exactly where I had left her, clutching her stuffed elephant. The police are coming, sweetheart, I told her. They're going to want to hear exactly what you heard last night. Can you tell them? She nodded solemnly, looking far too serious for a 7-year-old. We came downstairs just as the last guests were leaving. Marcus was standing in the foyer with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Mandarin. When he saw us, he ended the call abruptly. How are you feeling, princess? He asked Lily with a smile that looked painted on. Lily pressed herself against my leg and didn't answer. His smile faltered. Shy all of a sudden? Before anyone could respond, there was a firm knock at the door. Victoria opened it to reveal two Boston police officers, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a younger male officer who was already pulling out a notepad. Mrs. Chun? I'm Officer Patricia Reeves. You called about a possible food contamination incident. Victoria nodded, her composure cracking slightly. Yes. My daughter overheard a conversation that made us concerned about the safety of the birthday cake. Marcus stepped forward immediately, his expression shifting to confusion and concern. Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My wife is understandably worried because our daughter has been having nightmares lately. Children sometimes have difficulty separating dreams from reality. Officer Reeves looked at him steadily. And you are? Marcus Chun. This is my home. I'm happy to cooperate, but I think my wife may have overreacted to something our 7-year-old said. The way he said it, so reasonable and calm, almost made it sound true. Almost made it seem like Victoria and I were the irrational ones. But Officer Reeves didn't seem swayed. Why don't we all sit down and talk through what happened? Then we can determine if further action is needed. We moved to the living room, though Marcus remained standing near the fireplace. Officer Reeves sat across from Victoria and me while her partner positioned himself near the door. Lily sat on my lap, still gripping her elephant. Mrs. Chun, can you explain what concerns you have about the cake? Officer Reeves asked. Victoria glanced at Marcus, then back at the officer. I could see her gathering her courage. My daughter told my mother that she overheard my husband and his sister discussing putting medication into the cake. Medication meant to make me docile or compliant. Marcus let out a sharp laugh. This is insane. Victoria, what are you doing? Officer Reeves held up a hand. Mr. Chun, please let your wife finish. Victoria's voice was shaking but determined. My husband has been pressuring me for weeks to sign financial documents that would give him control of shares I inherited from my father. Shares worth approximately $8 million. I've been resisting because something about the arrangement doesn't feel right. And now my daughter says she heard him planning to drug me. This is based on the confused recollections of a 7-year-old child, Marcus said, his voice rising. Victoria, you know Lily has an active imagination. Last month she was convinced there were monsters in her closet. Are we calling the police about that too? Officer Reeves turned to Lily. Sweetheart, can you tell me what you heard? In your own words. Lily looked up at me and I nodded encouragingly. She took a breath and spoke in a small but clear voice. I went downstairs to get water because I was thirsty. It was really late, maybe 11 or midnight. Daddy's office door was open a little, and I heard him talking to Aunt Rebecca. He said the pharmacy stuff was in the cake, all mixed into the frosting. Aunt Rebecca said to make sure Mommy ate at least 2 pieces because one might not be enough. Then Daddy said it would keep her calm and happy during Monday's signing, and nobody would ever know. The room was completely silent when she finished. Even Marcus had stopped protesting, his face pale and his jaw clenched tight. Officer Reeves made notes in her pad, then looked at Marcus. Mr. Chun, does your sister work at a pharmacy? His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. She's a licensed pharmacist, yes. But that doesn't mean anything. My daughter is confused about what she heard. I'm not confused, Lily said quietly. You said it would taste like vanilla and nobody would notice. Marcus's expression shifted then, something cold and calculating replacing the earlier frustration. I want to speak to my lawyer before this goes any further. And Victoria, I strongly suggest you think about what you're accusing me of. There are consequences to making false allegations. Officer Reeves stood. Mr. Chun, we're going to need to secure that cake as potential evidence. We'll have it tested at our lab. If it contains unauthorized substances, there will be serious charges filed. You need a warrant for that, Marcus said immediately. Too immediately. Like he had been expecting this possibility. The female officer smiled thinly. Actually, your wife can consent to the search since this is her residence too and the item in question was a gift given to her. Mrs. Chun, do you consent to us taking the cake for testing? Victoria nodded without hesitation. Yes. Absolutely. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm calling my lawyer right now. Don't touch anything until he gets here. But Officer Reeves was already moving toward the dining room. Her partner followed, pulling on latex gloves. I watched Marcus's face as they disappeared into the next room, and what I saw there chilled me to the bone. It wasn't anger or indignation. It was cold calculation, like he was running through scenarios and determining his next move. Victoria must have seen it too, because she suddenly grabbed Lily from my lap and held her close. "Maybe we should wait outside," she said quietly. Before anyone could move, there was a commotion from the dining room. Officer Reeves called out sharply, "Mr. Chun, I need you to stay where you are." But Marcus was already moving, heading toward the dining room with quick strides. The male officer intercepted him, placing a hand firmly on his chest. "Sir, you need to remain in the living room. That's my home. You can't keep me from my own dining room." The tension in his voice was barely controlled now. Officer Reeves appeared in the doorway holding an evidence bag. Inside was a small amber prescription bottle. This was hidden behind the cake stand. "Can you explain why there's a bottle of Rohypnol in your dining room, Mr. Chan?" My stomach lurched. Rohypnol, the date rape drug. I had read about it in news articles about how it was used to incapacitate victims. Marcus's face went blank. "I have no idea where that came from. Someone must have planted it." Victoria made a small sound in the back of her throat, somewhere between a sob and a gasp of relief. Relief that she hadn't been crazy. Relief that her instincts had been right. "We're going to need you to come down to the station to answer some questions," Officer Reeves said. "And we'll be contacting your sister as well." "I'm not going anywhere without my lawyer," Marcus said. His phone was already at his ear. While he talked in low tones to his attorney, Victoria turned to me with tears streaming down her face. "I almost ate it. If Lily hadn't warned you, if you hadn't insisted we stop, I would have eaten that cake." I pulled both her and Lily into my arms, holding them tightly. "But you didn't. You're safe. You're both safe." Officer Reeves spoke quietly with her partner, then approached us. "Mrs. Chun, I know this is overwhelming, but I need to ask you some questions about your husband's recent behavior and the financial documents he wanted you to sign. Would you be willing to come to the station to give a formal statement?" Victoria nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes. Whatever you need." The next several hours passed in a blur of police stations, statements, and phone calls to lawyers. Victoria's attorney, a sharp woman named Margaret Torres who specialized in family law and financial fraud, arrived within an hour of being called. She took one look at the situation and immediately began building a case not just for criminal charges against Marcus, but also for an emergency restraining order and an immediate freeze on all joint accounts. By 7 that evening, Marcus had been arrested and charged with attempted felony assault with a controlled substance. His sister Rebecca was brought in for questioning and quickly admitted to providing the Rohypnol, though she claimed Marcus had told her it was for Victoria's anxiety and that she had a prescription. The toxicology report on the cake wouldn't be ready for several days, but the presence of the bottle was enough for the police to move forward with charges. Victoria, Lily, and I ended up at my small apartment in Cambridge rather than returning to the townhouse. None of us wanted to be in that perfect house with its perfect furniture and perfect cake that had nearly been used as a weapon. We ordered pizza and sat on my worn sofa eating from paper plates, still in our party clothes. Lily had finally relaxed enough to fall asleep curled up between Victoria and me, her elephant tucked under her chin. "I keep thinking about how long it must have taken him to plan this," Victoria said quietly, staring at nothing. "Talking to Rebecca, getting the drugs, arranging them in the cake. He must have thought about every detail." I reached over and took her hand. "What matters is that he didn't succeed." She looked at me with exhausted eyes. "Because of Lily. Because my 7-year-old daughter was braver than I've been in years. What kind of mother doesn't notice that her husband is dangerous?" I squeezed her hand firmly. "You're the kind of mother who raised a daughter smart enough and brave enough to speak up when something was wrong. You did that, Victoria. You taught her to trust her instincts and to tell someone when she felt afraid. That's why we're all safe right now." She leaned her head on my shoulder and we sat there in silence while Lily slept between us. My daughter's birthday party was supposed to have been a celebration of her success, her perfect life, her achievements. Instead, it had become the day she discovered her marriage was built on manipulation, and her husband was willing to drug her for money. But it was also the day she chose to believe her daughter and her mother over the man who had been systematically undermining her trust for months. The day she chose to fight back. 3 days later, the toxicology report came back. The cake had been laced with enough rohypnol to incapacitate someone Victoria's size for 6 to 8 hours. More than enough time for Marcus to have driven her to the board meeting, guided her hand to sign documents she wouldn't have understood in her drugged state, and made it look like she had willingly given him control of her inheritance. The report also found traces of the drug in the frosting specifically, just as Lily had said, mixed throughout so that anyone who ate a piece would be affected. The district attorney called it one of the most premeditated cases of attempted financial exploitation she had ever seen. Margaret Torres worked tirelessly to protect Victoria's assets, filing motions to freeze accounts, securing restraining orders, and building a civil case for the emotional and financial damages Marcus had caused. It turned out that Marcus's company was in serious financial trouble, something he had hidden from Victoria for months. He needed her shares not for tax purposes, but because the board of directors was threatening to oust him, unless he could prove he had enough capital backing to secure new investors. Without Victoria's $8 million stake, the company would have collapsed and taken his reputation with it. Claire Pemberton came forward with information she had been too afraid to share before. She testified that Marcus had been trying to isolate Victoria from her friends for years, always finding excuses why Victoria couldn't attend gatherings, or why they couldn't socialize with certain people. He had been slowly building a cage around my daughter, one where she would be dependent entirely on him for companionship, financial advice, and decision-making. Rebecca Chun pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for testifying against her brother. During her testimony, she revealed that Marcus had been planning this scheme for over 6 months, carefully researching dosages and timing, practicing how he would present the documents to Victoria in her drugged state. He had even made a test cake with sleeping pills weeks earlier to see if the taste would be detectable in the frosting. It hadn't been. The trial was scheduled for the following spring, but Marcus's lawyers knew they had no real defense. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses credible, the intent clear. They began negotiating a plea deal that would see Marcus sentenced to 12 years in prison for attempted assault with a controlled substance, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted theft by deception. Victoria filed for divorce immediately, seeking full custody of Lily with no visitation rights for Marcus. The judge granted her motion within days of reviewing the evidence. 6 months after that birthday party, Victoria sold the Beacon Hill townhouse. She said she never wanted to set foot in it again. Never wanted to see that dining room where the poisoned cake had sat looking so perfect and innocent. She bought a smaller place in Brookline, closer to my apartment, with a fenced backyard where Lily could play safely. The new house was comfortable rather than impressive, warm rather than intimidating. It felt like a home instead of a showpiece. On a gray November afternoon, the three of us sat in that new kitchen while rain pattered against the windows. Victoria was making hot chocolate from scratch, something she never would have done in her old life when everything had to be catered or professionally prepared. Lily sat at the table doing homework, occasionally asking questions about her math assignment. I watched them and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought tears to my eyes. "Mom," Victoria said, setting a mug of cocoa in front of me. She had gone back to calling me Mom after the incident, dropping the formal mother that had always created distance between us. "I never properly thanked you for believing me that day. For believing Lily. You saved my life." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. "You saved your own life by choosing to listen." She sat down across from me with her own cup. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you had dismissed what Lily said as childish imagination. If you had convinced me I was overreacting. I would have eaten that cake, signed those papers, and woken up hours later not even knowing what I had agreed to." Lily looked up from her homework. "Grandma always listens. That's why I told her first." Victoria reached over and smoothed her daughter's dark curls. "You were so brave, baby. You knew something was wrong and you spoke up even though it was scary." I thought about that moment in the dining room when Lily had gripped my wrist, her small face filled with fear. How easy it would have been to dismiss her concerns, to attribute them to a child's overactive imagination, to prioritize adult social conventions over a child's instinct. But something in her eyes had told me she was serious. She had risked her relationship with her father, risked being called a liar, risked everything to protect her mother. "What did the therapist say at your appointment yesterday?" Victoria asked Lily gently. The three of us had all been in therapy since the incident, processing the trauma in different ways. "She said it's okay to feel sad about Daddy. That loving someone and knowing they did bad things can happen at the same time." Lily's voice was matter of fact, but I could see the confusion still lingering in her eyes. "Do you miss him?" Victoria asked. Lily thought about it seriously. "I miss the daddy I thought he was. But Dr. Patterson says that person wasn't real. The real daddy was planning to hurt you, so I don't want to see him." It broke my heart to hear a 7-year-old grappling with such complex emotional truths. But she was doing it with a resilience and clarity that amazed me. "That makes sense," Victoria said softly. "I feel the same way sometimes." We sat together in comfortable silence, sipping our cocoa and watching the rain. The house felt peaceful in a way the Beacon Hill townhouse never had. There were no perfect surfaces to maintain, no appearances to keep up, no dangerous secrets hiding behind beautiful facades. Just 3 women who had survived something terrible together, and were slowly rebuilding on foundations of truth and trust. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Torres. The plea deal had been finalized. Marcus would serve 12 years with possibility of parole after 8. I showed the message to Victoria and watched her process it. 8 years minimum, she said quietly. Lily will be 15 by then. I nodded. And you'll have built a whole new life by then. Both of you. She looked around her new kitchen with its mismatched chairs and cheerful yellow walls. We already have. That evening after Lily had gone to bed, Victoria and I sat on her porch wrapped in blankets and watching the rain turn to mist. She had been quiet since receiving the news about Marcus's sentence, lost in thoughts she hadn't yet voiced. "Do you ever wonder what warning signs I missed at the beginning?" she finally asked. "What made me fall for someone capable of that?" I considered the question carefully. Marcus was good at being exactly what you needed. Charming, successful, attentive. People like him are expert manipulators. They study you and become your ideal partner. But I'm supposed to be smart, successful. How did I not see it? The old self-judgment was creeping back into her voice. "Because you loved him," I said simply. "And love makes us want to believe the best in people. That's not a weakness, Victoria. That's part of being human." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Claire told me she tried to warn me a year ago. Said she was worried about how controlling Marcus was becoming. But I got defensive. Told her she was jealous of our relationship. You weren't ready to hear it then." I watched the mist swirl around the streetlights. Sometimes we need to arrive at truth in our own time through our own process. You got there when you were ready. Victoria turned to look at me with something like wonder in her expression. "How did you get so wise?" I laughed. "I'm not wise. I'm just a mother who loves her daughter enough to believe her when she says something is wrong, even when it seems impossible." We sat together for a while longer, 2 generations of women who had learned the hard way that the people we trust most are sometimes the ones hiding the darkest intentions. But we had also learned that we were stronger than we knew, that instinct and courage could save us, and that rebuilding was always possible if we were willing to do the work. The rain had stopped by the time I drove home that night, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the glow of traffic lights. At a stoplight, I found myself thinking about that birthday cake sitting on Victoria's dining table. So beautiful and dangerous. A perfect metaphor for Marcus himself, I supposed. Attractive on the surface, poisonous underneath. But what stayed with me most was not the betrayal or the danger. It was the image of Lily gripping my wrist in that dining room. Her small face fierce with determination to protect her mother. 7 years old and already understanding that sometimes love means speaking uncomfortable truths. Sometimes it means being brave even when you're terrified. Sometimes it means trusting your instincts over every social convention that tells you to stay quiet and polite. She had saved her mother's life with a whispered warning, and the courage to trust that the adults in her life would believe her. And we had. Victoria and I had chosen to believe a child's concern over a charming man's denials. We had chosen truth over comfort, protection over politeness, action over doubt. That choice had saved all of us. Not just from a poisoned cake, but from years of continued manipulation, and abuse that would have only escalated if left unchecked. A year after the birthday party that never happened, Victoria threw another party. This time it was Lily's 8th birthday, celebrated in their sunny Brookline backyard with a small group of Real friends who had supported them through everything. There was a cake, but Victoria had made it herself with Lily's help. Chocolate with rainbow sprinkles, slightly lopsided and perfectly imperfect. I watched my granddaughter blow out her candles surrounded by people who genuinely loved her. Watched my daughter laugh freely in a way I hadn't heard in years. Watched both of them build a new life from the ashes of the old one. And I thought about warnings about the unexpected ways they come to us. Sometimes they arrive in whispered words from a frightened child. Sometimes they come from our own instincts that something isn't quite right. Sometimes they're delivered by friends we're not ready to hear. The important thing is learning to listen. Learning to trust those small voices that tell us something is wrong even when everything looks perfect on the surface. Learning to choose truth over comfort, even when the truth is devastating. Because in the end, it's better to face an ugly reality than to swallow a beautiful lie. Even if that lie comes wrapped in buttercream and sugar flowers. Even if it's served at a party celebrating everything you thought your life was supposed to be. The truth, no matter how painful, will always be less toxic than the pretty poison people sometimes try to feed us. And if we're lucky, we'll have someone brave enough to whisper a warning before we take that first deadly bite. The preliminary hearing took place on a Tuesday morning in late October, 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest. The courthouse was one of those imposing granite buildings in downtown Boston that made you feel small just walking up the steps. Victoria had dressed carefully in a navy suit that made her look professional and competent, armor against the vulnerability she was feeling. I sat beside her in the gallery while Margaret Torres conferred with the assistant district attorney, a sharp woman in her 30s named Jennifer Wu who had made prosecuting financial crimes her specialty. Marcus was led into the courtroom in handcuffs, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was a stark contrast to the expensive suits I had always seen him in. He looked thinner, his face gaunt and unshaven. When his eyes swept across the gallery and landed on Victoria, something flickered in his expression. Not remorse or regret, but calculation. Even now, even after everything, he was still trying to figure out how to manipulate the situation to his advantage. Victoria's hand found mine and squeezed hard. I could feel her trembling despite the composed expression on her face. Lily was not in the courtroom. We had agreed it would be too traumatic for her to see her father this way, and the judge had ruled that her recorded testimony would be sufficient for the preliminary hearing. The video had been taken 2 days after the incident, with a child psychologist present to ensure Lily felt safe and comfortable. Judge Patricia Hendricks entered and we all rose. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair, and a no-nonsense demeanor that had earned her a reputation for being tough but fair. She had reviewed all the evidence in advance and listened to Lily's testimony the previous day. Now she was here to determine whether there was sufficient cause to move forward with a trial. The proceedings began with Jennifer Wu laying out the prosecution's case in methodical detail. The timeline of events, starting with Lily overhearing the conversation between Marcus and his sister 6 nights before the birthday party. The discovery of the Rohypnol bottle hidden behind the cake stand. Rebecca Chen's testimony about providing the controlled substance to her brother under false pretenses. The toxicology report showing dangerous levels of the drug mixed throughout the cake frosting. Marcus's attorney, a slick defense lawyer named Richard Feldman who specialized in representing wealthy clients accused of white-collar crimes, tried to poke holes in the narrative. He suggested that Rebecca was lying to save herself, that the drugs could have been planted by someone else, that the whole thing was an elaborate misunderstanding. But his arguments sounded hollow even to my untrained ears. The evidence was too comprehensive, too damning. When it came time for Marcus to speak, Judge Hendricks asked him directly whether he had anything to say regarding the charges. Richard Feldman advised him not to answer, but Marcus waved him off and stood. He looked directly at Victoria as he spoke, his voice steady and almost hypnotic in its sincerity. Your Honor, I love my wife. Everything I've done over the past 8 years has been to build a life with her, to provide for our family, to create security for our daughter. Yes, I made mistakes in how I handled our financial arrangements. Yes, I should have been more transparent about my company's difficulties. But I would never harm Victoria. The idea that I would drug her is absurd and offensive. My sister was going through a difficult time and had access to prescription medications. I believe she may have acted on her own out of some misguided attempt to help, but I had no knowledge of any plan to put anything in that cake. It was a masterful performance. His voice broke at exactly the right moments, his expressions shifting between hurt and sincerity and wounded innocence. If I hadn't known the truth, if I hadn't seen the toxicology report and heard Rebecca's testimony and watched Lily's video statement, I might have almost believed him. That's how good he was at lying. But Victoria sat perfectly still beside me, her face betraying nothing. She had heard this particular symphony of manipulation too many times before. She knew all his notes, all his crescendos, all the places where he would pause for effect. And she was no longer moved by any of it. Judge Hendricks listened without expression, making notes on her legal pad. When Marcus finished his speech and sat down, she looked at him for a long moment before speaking. Mr. Chun, I've reviewed the evidence in this case extensively. I've watched the video testimony of your 7-year-old daughter describing in detail what she heard you say. I've read the expert analysis of the toxicology report. I've studied the financial documents showing your company's precarious position and your need for your wife's inherited shares. What I see here is a pattern of deliberate deception and premeditation. She paused, letting the words sink in. Marcus's confident expression was starting to crack around the edges. The prosecution has presented more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. I'm binding you over for criminal trial on all charges. Bail is set at $2 million with electronic monitoring if bail is posted. You are to have no contact whatsoever with the victim, Victoria Chun, or the witness, your daughter Lily Chun. This includes direct contact, indirect contact through third parties, letters, emails, or any other form of communication. Do you understand? Marcus's face had gone pale. Your Honor, I'm no flight risk. I'm a respected businessman with deep ties to this community. $2 million is excessive. Judge Hendricks looked at him coolly. Mr. Chun, you attempted to drug your wife to gain control of $8 million in assets. You demonstrated sophisticated planning and a willingness to endanger her health for financial gain. In my view, $2 million is entirely appropriate given the severity of the charges and the strength of the evidence. Unless you have something else to add, we're adjourned. She brought down her gavel with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the courtroom. Marcus's lawyer immediately began whispering urgently in his ear, probably explaining that posting $2 million in bail would require liquidating assets he no longer had full control over. Victoria had already moved to freeze all joint accounts, and had successfully argued that the shares her father left her should be protected from any claim Marcus might make. As the bailiffs led Marcus out of the courtroom, he turned one last time to look at Victoria. The mask had completely fallen away now. What I saw in his face was not love or regret but pure rage. The look of a man who had lost control of a situation he thought he had meticulously planned. A man who was just beginning to realize that his elaborate scheme had collapsed entirely because a 7-year-old child had been brave enough to tell the truth. Outside the courthouse, a small group of reporters had gathered. News of the case had started to spread, particularly because Marcus's tech company was well known in Boston business circles. The story of a wealthy entrepreneur attempting to drug his wife for her inheritance had all the elements that made for compelling headlines. Margaret Torres had prepared Victoria for this possibility, and had coached her on how to handle questions. But when the reporters surged forward with their microphones and cameras, Victoria surprised everyone by stopping on the courthouse steps and agreeing to make a brief statement. Margaret looked concerned but didn't try to stop her. Victoria took a deep breath and spoke clearly into the forest of microphones. I want to say something to anyone who might be watching this and wondering if they're in a similar situation. If you feel controlled by your partner, if they're isolating you from friends and family, if they're pressuring you to sign financial documents you don't fully understand, if something in your gut is telling you that things aren't right, please trust that instinct. I ignored warning signs for months because I didn't want to believe that someone I loved could be deceiving me. But the truth is that people who truly love us don't manipulate us or try to control us. They don't drug us or steal from us or make us doubt our own perceptions. Real love respects boundaries and honors trust. If you're experiencing anything less than that, please reach out for help. Talk to a lawyer, talk to a counselor, talk to someone you trust. Don't wait until it's too late. Her voice was steady throughout the entire statement. When she finished, she walked down the steps without taking any questions, her head held high. I followed close behind, incredibly proud of my daughter's courage. She had just exposed her private trauma to the world, had made herself vulnerable in a very public way, because she wanted to help other people who might be trapped in similar situations. That evening, Victoria's phone began ringing with calls from domestic violence organizations, from lawyers who wanted to offer pro bono assistance to women in similar circumstances, from journalists asking for interviews. She declined most of them, but she did agree to speak with a woman named Dr. Lisa Hammond, who ran a nonprofit called Financial Abuse Awareness Network. Dr. Hammond came to Victoria's house 2 days later, a warm woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner of speaking. She sat at Victoria's kitchen table drinking tea and explaining the work her organization did. Financial abuse is one of the most underreported forms of domestic violence, she said. People don't recognize it as abuse because there are no visible bruises, no physical violence. But the impact is devastating. It's about power and control, just like other forms of abuse. Victoria nodded slowly. I never thought of myself as a victim of domestic violence. Marcus never hit me. He was never physically threatening. Dr. Hammond leaned forward. But he isolated you from your support system. He pressured you to give him control over your finances. He made you doubt your own judgment. And when those tactics weren't working quickly enough, he was prepared to use drugs to incapacitate you. That's abuse, Victoria. The fact that it wasn't physical doesn't make it any less real or any less harmful. I watched my daughter's face as Dr. Hammond spoke, seeing recognition dawn in her eyes. She had been struggling with whether she had the right to call herself a victim, whether what she experienced qualified as abuse when so many other people suffered worse. But hearing it laid out in clear terms, understanding that manipulation and control were forms of violence, even when they left no visible scars, seemed to give her permission to acknowledge the full extent of what had happened. I'd like you to consider speaking at some of our events, Dr. Hammond continued. Your story is powerful because you're educated, successful, financially independent. You represent the fact that financial abuse can happen to anyone, regardless of their background or intelligence. A lot of people think it only happens to women who are economically dependent on their partners, but that's not true. Abusers target people of all socioeconomic levels. Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering. What would I have to do? Dr. Hammond smiled. Just tell your story. Talk about the warning signs you missed, the tactics Marcus used, how you finally recognized what was happening. You'd be helping other people identify abuse in their own relationships, and giving them the courage to seek help. Over the next several weeks, Victoria threw herself into this new purpose. She began speaking at events organized by Dr. Hammond's nonprofit, sharing her story with groups of women who were navigating their own situations of financial abuse. She spoke at law schools about the legal complexities of prosecuting financial crimes within marriages. She even did a podcast interview that reached thousands of people. I went to one of her speaking events at a community center in Somerville. The room was packed with about 50 women of all ages and backgrounds. Victoria stood at the front with a microphone, looking nervous but determined. She told her story from beginning to end, holding nothing back. She talked about falling in love with Marcus, about the gradual escalation of controlling behaviors that she had dismissed or rationalized, about the pressure to sign documents she didn't understand. And then she talked about Lily's whispered warning and the choice she had made to believe her daughter despite all of Marcus's charm and persuasion. I think the hardest part, she said to the rapt audience, was accepting that I had been fooled. I'm a smart person. I have an MBA from a good school. I ran my own consulting business before I got married. How could I not see what was happening? But I've learned that intelligence doesn't protect you from manipulation. Education doesn't make you immune to abuse. These predators are skilled at what they do. They study you and adapt to you and find your vulnerabilities. The shame I felt about being deceived almost kept me from seeking help. But I realized that the shame belongs to Marcus, not to me. He's the one who chose to lie and manipulate and drug. All I did was trust someone I loved. There's no shame in that. The applause when she finished was thunderous. During the question and answer session that followed, several women came forward with their own stories. A woman in her 40s whose husband had been forging her signature on loan documents. A young woman whose boyfriend had convinced her to put his name on her car title, and then sold the car without her knowledge. An elderly woman whose adult son had been stealing from her retirement accounts. Each story was different in its details but the same in its fundamental dynamic. Someone with power using that power to exploit someone who trusted them. After the event ended, women lined up to thank Victoria personally, to tell her that her story had given them the courage to leave or to press charges, or to simply start asking questions. I stood to the side watching my daughter transform her pain into purpose, and I felt such overwhelming pride that tears streamed down my face. That night, after we got back to her house and Lily was asleep, Victoria and I sat in her living room with glasses of wine. She looked exhausted but also energized in a way I hadn't seen in years. "I never expected this," she said quietly. "I thought I was just going to testify at Marcus's trial, and then try to move on with my life. I didn't think I'd end up becoming some kind of advocate." I smiled at her over my wine glass. "You're good at it. Those women connected with you because you're honest about how it felt to be deceived. You're not standing on some pedestal telling them what they should have seen. You're standing beside them saying you've been there too." She swirled the wine in her glass, watching the light catch in the dark liquid. "Do you think Lily will be okay? Growing up knowing her father tried to drug her mother." It was a question she had asked variations of many times over the past weeks. The guilt of exposing her daughter to this trauma, even though the trauma had been caused entirely by Marcus, weighed heavily on her. "Lily is resilient," I said. "And she has you. She has me. She has a therapist who specializes in childhood trauma. She's not alone in processing this, and that makes all the difference." Victoria nodded, but I could see the worry still lingering in her eyes. "She asked me yesterday if Daddy was a bad person. I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that someone can be both the father who read bedtime stories and taught her to ride a bike, and also the person who planned to drug her mother?" I thought about it for a moment. "What did you tell her?" Victoria set down her wine glass. "I told her that people are complicated, that her father did things that were very wrong and hurtful, but that doesn't erase the times when he was a good dad to her. I told her she's allowed to have complicated feelings about it. She can be angry at what he did and still remember the good times. Both things can be true at once." It was exactly the right thing to say, I thought. Children needed permission to hold complexity, to understand that people weren't simply good or bad, but capable of both kindness and cruelty. The trial date was set for March, 5 months after Marcus's arrest. In the interim, his company collapsed exactly as everyone had predicted it would. Without Victoria's shares to leverage, without Marcus's leadership now that he was facing criminal charges, the board of directors voted to dissolve the business and sell off its assets. The investors lost most of their money, and several threatened lawsuits against Marcus personally. It turned out that Marcus had been using company funds inappropriately for years, mixing business expenses with personal luxuries, and hiding the discrepancies through creative accounting. The forensic accountants who went through the books found evidence of embezzlement, tax fraud, and multiple counts of securities fraud. By the time the investigation was complete, Marcus was facing an additional 30 charges beyond the original assault and conspiracy charges. His lawyer Richard Feldman withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable differences with his client. Translation: Marcus couldn't pay his fees anymore and had become impossible to defend. Marcus ended up with a public defender, an overworked woman in her 30s named Amanda Price who looked exhausted every time I saw her in court. The prosecutor Jennifer Wu was building an airtight case. She had Rebecca Chen's testimony describing in detail how Marcus had pressured her to obtain the Rohypnol, claiming it was for Victoria's anxiety, but making it clear he wanted no prescription record. She had the toxicology report showing dangerous levels of the drug throughout the cake. She had Lily's testimony, which had been reviewed by 3 separate child psychologists who all confirmed that her account was consistent, detailed, and credible. She had the financial records showing Marcus's desperate need for Victoria's money. She had testimony from Victoria's friends about how Marcus had isolated her and controlled her movements. She had emails Marcus had sent to potential investors promising them access to capital that he could only obtain through Victoria's shares. The evidence was overwhelming. 2 weeks before the trial was set to begin, Amanda Price contacted Margaret Torres with a plea offer. Marcus would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence recommendation of 15 years with possibility of parole after 10. It was actually a worse deal than what had been offered months earlier. But Marcus's position had deteriorated so significantly that he had no leverage left to negotiate. Victoria had to decide whether to accept the plea or proceed to trial. Margaret laid out the options clearly. If we go to trial, you'll have to testify. You'll have to sit in that courtroom and face Marcus while he and his lawyer try to discredit you. It will be traumatic and exhausting. But there's also a chance, however small, that a jury might not convict on all charges. There's always uncertainty with trials. She paused, letting Victoria absorb that information. If you accept the plea, Marcus admits guilt to everything. There's no trial, no testimony, no risk of acquittal. He goes to prison for a minimum of 10 years and you can start moving forward with your life. The downside is that you don't get your day in court. You don't get to publicly confront him about what he did. Victoria was quiet for a long time. We were sitting in Margaret's office on the 15th floor of a building in the financial district, looking out over Boston Harbor. The water was gray and choppy under winter clouds. What do you think Lily needs? Victoria finally asked. Does she need to see him convicted at trial? Or does she need this to be over so we can move on? Margaret considered the question carefully. I think Lily needs to see that bad actions have consequences. That when someone does something wrong, there are systems in place to hold them accountable. Whether that happens through a guilty plea or a guilty verdict is less important than the fact that it happens. Victoria turned to me. Mom? What do you think? I had been dreading this question because I knew there was no perfect answer. I think you should do whatever feels right to you. If you need to testify, if you need to look him in the eye and make him hear what he did to you, then we'll support you through a trial. But if you're ready to be done with him, to close this chapter and move forward, then accepting the plea is fine too. There's no wrong choice here. Victoria stared out at the harbor for several more minutes. When she spoke, her voice was firm and clear. I'll accept the plea. Not because I'm afraid of testifying or because I want to protect him from additional consequences, but because dragging this out for months of trial proceedings would give him more power over my life. He's already taken too much time, too much energy, too much of who I am. I want him gone. I want to be done thinking about him and planning around him and organizing my life in response to what he did. I want to move forward. Margaret nodded with approval. I think that's a wise choice. I'll contact the prosecutor and finalize the plea agreement. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold morning in February. The courtroom was less crowded this time, mostly just the lawyers and court personnel and Victoria and me in the gallery. Marcus was brought in wearing the same orange jumpsuit he had worn to every appearance, but he looked worse than before. Prison had not been kind to him. His face was bruised, suggesting he had been in at least one altercation with other inmates. His expensive haircut had grown out into an unkempt mess. The confident charm that had once been his most powerful weapon had been stripped away entirely. Judge Hendricks presided over the proceeding with her characteristic efficiency. She had reviewed the plea agreement and all the evidence in the case. Now she asked Marcus to confirm his guilty plea on each charge. Attempted assault with a controlled substance. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Attempted theft by deception. Embezzlement. Securities fraud. Tax evasion. The list went on and on. After each charge, Marcus answered in a flat voice. Guilty. When all the charges had been confirmed, Judge Hendricks asked if either side had any statements before sentencing. Jennifer Wu stood and delivered a powerful summary of the case, emphasizing the premeditation and the violation of trust involved. This defendant spent months planning to drug his wife and steal her inheritance. He enlisted his sister in the scheme. He researched dosages and timing. He practiced his deception. This was not a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. This was calculated exploitation of someone who trusted him completely. Then it was time for the victim impact statement. Victoria had been working on hers for weeks with her therapist, trying to articulate the full scope of what Marcus's actions had cost her. She whipped her hair around her face. 18 years, she said quietly. Lily will be 25 when he's eligible for parole. I put my arm around her shoulders. And you'll have built an entirely new life by then. This chapter is over. She leaned into me, and I felt some of the tension drain from her body. It's really over, isn't it? He can't hurt us anymore. I nodded, looking up at the gray Boston sky. It's really over. But of course it wasn't quite that simple. Healing is never a straight line, and the impact of Marcus's betrayal continued to ripple through our lives in ways both large and small. Victoria went through periods of depression where she couldn't get out of bed, days when the weight of what had happened felt too heavy to carry. She had panic attacks in grocery stores when she saw men who reminded her of Marcus. She went through phases of not being able to sleep, lying awake at night replaying every moment of their relationship and trying to identify exactly when things had turned dangerous. Lily struggled too. Her nightmares persisted for months, dreams where her father was chasing her or trying to hurt her mother. She developed separation anxiety, becoming distressed whenever Victoria left her sight. She asked endless questions about where her father was, whether he could escape from prison, whether he was angry at her for telling what she had heard. Dr. Patterson, her therapist, was patient and skilled, using play therapy and art therapy to help Lily process her trauma in age-appropriate ways. But gradually, incrementally, they both began to heal. Victoria got stronger, more confident in her own judgment. She started trusting her instincts again instead of second-guessing every decision. She rebuilt her consulting business, working with small nonprofits who needed strategic planning assistance. The work was fulfilling in a way her previous career had never been. She was helping organizations that made a real difference in people's lives, rather than chasing profit margins for corporations. Lily slowly came back to herself too. The nightmares became less frequent. She started playing with friends again, laughing at silly jokes, being a kid instead of a traumatized witness. She joined a soccer team and discovered she loved running up and down the field, loved the teamwork and strategy of the game. She made new friends at her new school, kids who knew nothing about her father or the trial or any of it. She got to just be Lily, not the girl whose father tried to poison her mother. I watched both of them rebuild their lives with a grandmother's pride and relief. But I also did my own work of healing and processing. I spent sessions with my own therapist talking about the guilt I felt. Had I missed signs that Marcus was dangerous? Should I have warned Victoria more forcefully about my concerns? Why hadn't I trusted my own instincts about him? My therapist, a kind man named Dr. Robert Martinez who specialized in family trauma, helped me see that I had done exactly what I needed to do when it mattered most. I had believed Lily. I had supported Victoria. I had acted decisively to protect them both. The fact that I hadn't seen the danger earlier didn't mean I had failed. It meant that Marcus had been skilled at deception, skilled enough to fool everyone who knew him. Predators like Marcus Chun operate by exploiting our natural tendency to see the best in people, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions. They use our trust against us. That's not a flaw in us. That's a flaw in them. The fact that you're capable of trust, that you don't automatically assume everyone is dangerous, that's actually a strength. It's what allows you to build real connections with people. His words helped, though I still had moments of doubt and self-recrimination. But mostly, I focused on being present for Victoria and Lily, on helping them navigate this new reality they hadn't chosen but were learning to live in. We established new traditions together, ways of marking time that had nothing to do with Marcus or the trial or any of it. Sunday brunches at my apartment where we made pancakes and played board games. Monthly trips to museums or parks or anywhere Lily wanted to explore. Weekly phone calls even when we had just seen each other just to check in and maintain connection. A year after the sentencing, Victoria received a letter from Marcus. It came to Margaret Torres's office rather than Victoria's home address, forwarded through the prison system. Margaret called to tell Victoria it had arrived and asked whether she wanted to read it. "What does it say?" Victoria asked, her voice tense. Margaret had already reviewed it as Victoria's attorney. "It's an apology of sorts. He says he's been in therapy in prison and has started to understand the harm he caused. He asks for your forgiveness. He says he hopes someday you'll let him have a relationship with Lily again." Victoria was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm. "I don't want to read it. And the answer is no. He doesn't get access to Lily. Not now, not when he's released, not ever. He lost that right when he chose to drug me." Margaret made a sound of approval. "I think that's wise. Should I respond on your behalf telling him not to contact you again?" Yes, please. Make it clear that any future attempts at communication will be viewed as harassment and violations of the no-contact order. Victoria hung up and stared at her phone for a few minutes. I was with her at the time, helping her organize some files for her consulting business. Are you okay? I asked gently. She nodded slowly. I think so. A year ago, part of me would have wanted to read that letter. Would have wanted to believe that he was genuinely sorry that he had changed. But now I know that's just another manipulation. He wants forgiveness because it makes him feel better. Stood at the podium with a piece of paper in her trembling hands, and began to read in a voice that grew stronger as she progressed. Your Honor, when I married Marcus-chan, I thought I was building a partnership with someone who loved me. What I actually entered was a calculated scheme where I was nothing more than a source of money to be manipulated and controlled. For 8 years he systematically isolated me from my friends and family. He undermined my confidence in my own judgment. He made me doubt my perceptions and question my instincts. He created an environment where I was completely dependent on him for validation and decision-making. She paused, looking directly at Marcus for the first time. He kept his eyes downcast, refusing to meet her gaze. When his manipulation wasn't working fast enough, when I started asking questions he couldn't answer, he decided to drug me. He was willing to incapacitate me, to violate my bodily autonomy in the most fundamental way, just so he could steal money that my father had left to me. Money my father worked his entire life to accumulate. Money he left to me because he loved me and wanted me to be secure. Victoria's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed forward. The psychological damage from this betrayal has been immense. I struggle to trust people. I second-guess every relationship, wondering if someone is being genuine or if they're manipulating me. I have nightmares about what would have happened if my daughter hadn't overheard that conversation. Would I have signed away my entire inheritance while drugged? Would Marcus have escalated to more dangerous forms of control? I'll never know, and that uncertainty haunts me. She took a breath, steadying herself. But what hurts most is what this has done to my daughter. Lily loved her father. She trusted him completely. And now she knows that he was willing to hurt her mother for money. She knows that he prioritized his greed over our safety and well-being. That knowledge has changed her. She's more fearful, more suspicious, less willing to trust. She has nightmares. She asks me constantly if I'm safe, if anyone is trying to hurt me. No 7-year-old should carry that burden. Victoria folded her paper, having delivered everything she needed to say. Your Honor, I'm asking you to impose the maximum sentence allowed under the plea agreement. Not because I want revenge, but because I want other potential victims to understand that there are real consequences for this kind of calculated exploitation. I want Marcus-chan to spend enough time in prison that when he's released, my daughter will be an adult who has had the chance to heal and build a life free from his influence. Thank you. She returned to her seat beside me and I took her hand, squeezing tight. She had done beautifully, articulating the harm with precision and emotion. Marcus's lawyer Amanda Price stood next and made a half-hearted argument for leniency, citing Marcus's difficult childhood and the pressure he had been under from failing business. But even she seemed to recognize that there was nothing she could say that would meaningfully reduce his sentence. Judge Hendricks listened to everything without expression. When all the statements had been made, she addressed Marcus directly. Mr. Chun, you have pleaded guilty to a series of crimes that demonstrate a profound disregard for the law and for the people who trusted you. You exploited your wife financially and emotionally. You were prepared to drug her to facilitate theft. You involved your sister in your criminal scheme. You embezzled from your company and defrauded investors. The evidence shows a pattern of deception and manipulation that spans years. She paused, her gaze stern and unwavering. Your wife's impact statement makes clear the devastating effect your actions have had on her and on your daughter. You have traumatized your own child, Mr. Chun. You have destroyed your family for financial gain. I find your conduct to be reprehensible in the extreme. Therefore, I am sentencing you to 15 years in federal prison on the assault and conspiracy charges, to run concurrently with additional sentences on the fraud and embezzlement charges. Total time to be served: 18 years with possibility of parole after 12. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to your wife for all stolen funds, to your company's investors for their losses, and to the state for court costs and investigation expenses. 18 years. The number hung in the air like a physical weight. Marcus's face went completely white. He had been expecting 10 years, maybe 12 at most. But Judge Hendricks had gone beyond even the prosecutor's recommendation, stacking some of the sentences consecutively rather than concurrently to reflect the severity and breadth of his crimes. "Do you have anything to say, Mr. Chun?" the judge asked. Marcus stood slowly, his legs visibly shaking. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet we could barely hear him. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." It was the first time he had apologized, but the words rang hollow. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry he had been caught, sorry he was facing consequences. There was a difference, and everyone in that courtroom could hear it. Judge Hendricks brought down her gavel. "This court is adjourned." The bailiffs moved forward to take Marcus back to holding. As they led him away, he turned one last time to look at Victoria. But she wasn't watching him anymore. She had already turned toward the exit, ready to walk out of that courtroom and into the rest of her life. A life that no longer included him in any meaningful way. Outside, the February air was bitterly cold but somehow refreshing after the stifling atmosphere of the courtroom. Victoria stood on the courthouse steps breathing deeply, letting the winter. "Not because he's actually done the work to deserve it. And I don't owe him anything. Not my forgiveness, not my time, not my emotional energy. I gave him 8 years of my life. He doesn't get another minute." I felt such pride in that moment, hearing the strength and clarity in her voice. This was not the woman who had stood in that elegant townhouse kitchen a year ago, confused and frightened and doubting her own perceptions. This was someone who had walked through fire and emerged with a core of steel. The years passed. Lily grew into a bright, resilient 10-year-old who loved soccer and science and reading mystery novels. She still saw Dr. Patterson occasionally when the anniversary of the incident triggered difficult feelings, but mostly she was a normal kid with normal kid concerns. She never asked about her father anymore. As far as she was concerned, he was part of a past that no longer had power over her present. Victoria's advocacy work with Dr. Hammond's organization grew and expanded. She became a recognized voice in conversations about financial abuse and domestic violence. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, consulted with lawmakers on legislation to protect victims. She turned her trauma into purpose, using her story to help countless other people recognize and escape dangerous situations. And I continued to be present for both of them, the steady grandmother presence that offered love and support and occasionally homemade cookies. We built a new family structure, one based on honesty and mutual respect and genuine care. One where people said what they meant and meant what they said. One where trust was earned through consistent actions rather than manipulative words. 3 years after the sentencing, Victoria met someone new. His name was James, a high school history teacher who came to one of her speaking events because his sister had been a victim of financial abuse. He approached Victoria after her presentation to thank her for her work and to tell her that his sister had used resources from Dr. Hammond's organization to escape her situation. They started talking first about advocacy work and then about other things, books they had both read, places they wanted to travel. Their shared love of terrible reality television shows that they watched ironically. Victoria told me about him after their third coffee date, looking both excited and terrified. "I really like him, Mom. But I'm so scared. What if I'm wrong again? What if I'm seeing what I want to see instead of what's really there?" I listened to her fears with empathy, remembering my own fears about trusting people after my divorce from her father. "You're not the same person you were when you met Marcus," I told her. "You've done years of therapy. You've learned to recognize red flags. You trust your instincts now instead of dismissing them. And most importantly, you're not in a hurry. You can take your time getting to know James without pressure to commit to anything." She nodded, taking in my words. "He wants to meet Lily. Is it too soon?" I thought about it carefully. "What does your therapist say?" Victoria smiled slightly. "She says I should trust my gut. That I know what's right for my family better than anyone else." "And what does your gut say?" "That James is genuine. That he respects boundaries. That he's patient and kind and not trying to rush anything. But I'm still scared of getting it wrong." I took her hand across the table. "Being scared doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you've learned that people can hurt you. That's a reasonable fear given what you've been through. But fear shouldn't keep you from opening yourself to the possibility of something good. Victoria introduced James to Lily 2 months later, at a casual picnic in a public park where Lily felt safe and could leave if she wanted to. James brought a kite and taught Lily how to fly it, patiently untangling the string when it got caught in trees and celebrating with her when she finally got it soaring high above the field. I watched from a distance, observing how he interacted with her. There was no pressure, no forced attempts to win her over. He just treated her like a person whose company he enjoyed. After the picnic, Lily gave her verdict. "He's nice, Mommy. And he didn't try to be my dad." I liked that. It was the highest praise she could have given. Victoria and James dated for 2 years before they got engaged, taking their time to build trust and compatibility. When he proposed, it was nothing like Marcus's elaborate production with the expensive ring and the public drama. James asked Victoria quietly one evening when they were cooking dinner together, telling her simply that he loved her and wanted to build a life with her if she wanted the same thing. She said yes, but asked if they could have a long engagement. She wanted to be absolutely certain before she married again. James agreed without hesitation, understanding that her caution came from painful experience rather than lack of love for him. They were married eventually, a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Lily was the flower girl, wearing a dress she had picked out herself. I walked Victoria down the aisle, both of us crying happy tears. It was nothing like her first wedding to Marcus, which had been a huge production at an expensive venue with hundreds of guests. This was intimate and genuine, focused on the actual commitment being made rather than the performance of it. During the vows, Victoria looked James in the eye and promised things that really mattered. To trust him but also to trust herself. To build a partnership of equals. To communicate honestly even when it was difficult. To never let fear or complacency prevent her from speaking up if something felt wrong. And James made his own promises. To respect her boundaries. To be patient with her healing. To love Lily as his own without trying to replace her father. To show up consistently, day after day, and prove through actions rather than words that he was trustworthy. 5 years after Marcus's sentencing, on what would have been his 50th birthday, Victoria received a notification that he was eligible for a parole hearing. It sent her into a spiral of anxiety for several days. The thought of him potentially being released, potentially being able to find her and Lily, was terrifying despite the protective orders that would remain in place. But Margaret Torres was prepared. She had been monitoring Marcus's status in prison, and had already gathered evidence to present at the parole hearing. Evidence that he had been involved in multiple fights with other inmates. Evidence that he had violated prison rules repeatedly. Evidence that his so-called therapy had been minimal and superficial. Most damning, evidence that he had been writing letters to other inmates' wives and girlfriends, attempting to run financial schemes even from inside prison. The parole board denied his request within an hour of the hearing starting. He would not be eligible to apply again for another 3 years. Victoria cried with relief when Margaret called with the news. "He's never going to change," she said to me that evening as we sat on her porch watching Lily and James kick a soccer ball around the backyard. "He's always going to be looking for the angle, for the way to manipulate and exploit. Prison hasn't reformed him. It's just contained him." I nodded in agreement. Some people are fundamentally broken in ways that can't be fixed. The best we can do is protect ourselves and each other from them. We sat in comfortable silence, watching James intentionally miss a goal so Lily could score. She cheered and did a victory dance while he applauded. These small moments of ordinary happiness were precious in a way they never would have been if we hadn't experienced the alternative. Lily was 13 now, a teenager navigating middle school with all its social complexity. She played on a competitive soccer team and was considering trying out for the debate team. She had friends, hobbies, a life rich with possibilities. Sometimes I would watch her and marvel at her resilience. She carried scars from what happened, certainly. She was more cautious than other kids her age, less quick to trust, more observant of people's inconsistencies. But she was also strong and confident in her own judgment. One evening when I was over for dinner, Lily asked me something I had been half expecting for years. "Grandma, do you think I should try to see my biological father before I'm an adult? Some people say everyone deserves a relationship with their parents, even if the parents did bad things." I looked at Victoria, who nodded slightly, giving me permission to answer honestly. I think that's a decision only you can make, sweetheart. But I'll tell you what I believe. Your biological father made choices that showed he valued money more than your mother's safety, more than your well-being. Those weren't mistakes or accidents. Those were deliberate decisions to harm people he was supposed to protect. I paused, making sure she was really listening. Now, if someday you decide you want to meet him, to ask him questions, to try to understand his perspective, that's your right. But you should do it from a place of strength, not from obligation. You don't owe him a relationship just because he's biologically related to you. James has been more of a father to you than Marcus ever was, because James shows up every day and puts your needs first. That's what real parenting looks like. Lily thought about this seriously. I don't think I want to see him. Maybe when I'm older, like in my 20s, I might be curious. But right now I have a family that loves me and keeps me safe. I don't need anything from him. It was a mature answer for a 13-year-old, but then Lily had been forced to mature faster than most kids. She had learned early that adults weren't always trustworthy, that love could be conditional, that safety required vigilance. Those were hard lessons, but she had integrated them without letting them make her cynical or closed off. Victoria hugged her daughter tightly. Whatever you decide, now or later, we support you. And if you never want to see him, that's okay too. You get to choose who is in your life. That night after I got home to my own apartment, I thought about families and what they really meant. Not the biological connections that society placed so much weight on, but the chosen bonds we created through consistent care and mutual respect. Victoria, Lily, James, and I were a family not because of blood or law, but because we chose each other every day. We showed up for each other. We told hard truths. We protected each other fiercely. Marcus was Lily's biological father, but he had forfeited any real claim to being her parent when he chose his greed over her well-being. James was her father in all the ways that actually mattered. He coached her soccer team. He helped with homework. He respected her boundaries. He loved her mother in a healthy way that modeled for Lily what real partnership looked like. That was what parenting meant. Not genetics but devotion. Not obligation but choice. As the years continued to pass, our wounds healed, though they never disappeared entirely. We each carried scars from what Marcus had done, reminders to stay vigilant and trust our instincts. But we also carried gratitude. Gratitude that Lily had been brave enough to speak up. Gratitude that I had chosen to believe her. Gratitude that Victoria had chosen truth over comfort. Those choices had saved us all and taught us lessons that shaped how we moved through the world. Victoria continued her advocacy work, helping hundreds of people recognize and escape financial abuse. Lily grew into a remarkable young woman who wanted to study psychology, so she could help other trauma survivors. James remained a steady, loving presence who proved every day that good men existed. And I watched it all unfold with a grandmother's pride, and the hard-won wisdom of someone who had learned that the most important choice we can make is to listen when someone we love tells us something is wrong. Even if it seems impossible. Even if it disrupts everything we thought we knew. Even if believing means facing devastating truths. Because sometimes the whispered warning of a frightened child is the only thing standing between safety and disaster. And sometimes choosing to believe the unexpected is the choice that saves everything that matters. 10 years after that birthday party, I stood in the audience watching Lily graduate from Boston University with a degree in psychology. Victoria sat beside me, James on her other side, all of us beaming with pride. Lily had transformed her childhood trauma into purpose, planning to work with children who had experienced family violence. Marcus remained in prison, his parole repeatedly denied. We had built something beautiful from the ashes of his betrayal. A family bound not by obligation but by choice, trust, and unwavering love. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from surviving what should have destroyed us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.